We continue, of course, to hear stories of Rohingya refugees fleeing Myanmar. Arthi Pol is watching the situation on the ground there. What is the latest you're hearing, Arthi?
You know, Suhana, really, we've been talking about this situation quite intensely for the past few months, but it has been going on for years. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar that have been forced to flee, and many of them are heading to Bangladesh to seek out safety because of what they call the persecution and violence against their community in the Buddhist majority country of Myanmar. We know that it intensified in August of 2017 when there was ongoing violence between the Rohingya Muslim population and the military government-run military in Burma, specifically within the Rakhine state, which is where we know so many of these Rohingya Muslims are coming from. So what is the latest today? You were looking at some of the images of a boat there of, in fact, Rohingya Muslims continuing to flee from the country. In fact, they were intercepted by officials from Malaysia off a northern island near Malaysia, and they were brought to safety because of the conditions there. So what we do know is that this continues to happen. We, of course, heard from the Canadian government about a strategy that needs to be employed in order to help the situation and to quell the crisis that has continued to grow. In terms of what is happening, we know that the UN has called it ethnic cleansing. Let's bring up some other points about what we've heard from the UN and from global partners. It's often described as the world's most persecuted minority, the Rohingya people are. And there's about 700,000 Rohingyas who have fled from the Rakhine to Bangladesh since August 2017, and almost 1 million are now living in those camps in Bangladesh. Again, these are not great conditions for these individuals, and nearly 1 million of them crammed into an already small country, Suhana.
And it's going to get wet soon. Monsoon season is going to be upon them. What are the, I suppose, challenges there?
Well, we're talking about hundreds of thousands. We know nearly 1 million people are in this situation where they're in these refugee camps. You saw some of the infrastructure in these camps. Really, it's not that strong. How will that withstand a monsoon, landslide? So we know that they're in a very precarious position as they are waiting for these monsoons to come. We know that there are not enough facilities for individuals, that hygiene has become a problem as well. For example, the World Health Organization says that it had to start about 900,000 doses of the cholera vaccine within these camps as well. We've got a map to show you just how widespread these camps are throughout the country in Bangladesh, and you can see really how spread out these Rohingya Muslims are, and it is a crisis that we know, for example, the Canadian government says it needs to act fast. Suhana.
Thanks for that, Arthi.
You're welcome.
And let's just stay on this story unfolding in Myanmar, with more on the preparation for monsoon season that Arthi was talking about and the challenges on the ground. Our Chase team has reached a senior information officer with the United Nations Refugee Agency. Caroline Gluck is in Cox's Bazar. That is a refugee camp in Bangladesh. Caroline, help me to understand the conditions there. Can you describe how people are living in the camps?
Well, as your reporter said, they arrived in their hundreds and thousands. This was the fastest growing humanitarian crisis in the world when it unfolded back in August. Hundreds of thousands of people are now in makeshift settlements. They're living in very flimsy shelters. We've upgraded them ahead of the monsoons, but still they're living in bamboo shelters reinforced by tarpaulins to keep them watertight. They're living in very tightly congested areas. These settlements used to be forest land. They're very hilly, so the topography is really difficult. People have had to build houses where they can find land, and often that's meant that they've built them on very steep slopes of more than 45 degrees, or even in flat areas that are prone to floods. Now, we deem that these people are at high risk of losing their homes and possibly their lives unless they're moved to safer locations. The monsoons are just weeks away, and really it's a race against time to try and help people be better protected to deal with what the weather is going to come, what the weather will do here. Bangladesh routinely experiences natural disasters and quite often cyclones every year as well. So it's going to be very challenging in the next few months.
You mentioned those people who need to be moved out of the camps. And there have got to be some challenges there, especially, as you mentioned, with the monsoons coming. What are, I suppose, the biggest hurdles you're going to face in getting those 150,000 people moved?
Well, the biggest challenge is where do you move them to? We've been advocating for many months to the government to provide extra land, and extra land has been provided, some 500 acres, both to UNHCR and IOM, who are operationally managing the refugee settlements. However, this land, again, is forested and hilly. It's not suitable to immediately move people, and we have to do a lot of work to prepare the land. We're working now on a site of 123 acres to literally slice the tops of the hills and to make the land flatter, so we can put in services, so we can relocate as many people as will fit that area. But it's not going to be enough. We need more suitable flat land, and we need it very quickly. Assuming that we might not get that, we are in the settlements themselves strengthening those areas to mitigate the risks. We're reinforcing slopes, we're building bridges, we're strengthening pathways, we're installing drainage systems, and we're paving the main access road, which cuts through the biggest settlement, which houses almost 600,000 refugees. So it's extremely challenging, and we are extremely concerned about the next few months.
Caroline, final question for you. We just had a final report from what Canada called its special envoy to Myanmar. His name is Bob Rae. Perhaps that doesn't matter for you, but Canadians certainly know him. And he has just said that there are some recommendations that, the international community, Canada, needs to step up its efforts, that people there who are responsible for the violence must be held accountable, and that the world needs to work together, perhaps that there should be a strike or to strike a task force specifically here to Canada. Do these things sound like they will work for what you're dealing with there?
Well, there are many, many challenges ahead. I think the most immediate, as I've said, is the approaching monsoon and the humanitarian effort, working very closely with the government of Bangladesh, that's been incredibly generous in allowing to keep its borders open, in providing assistance, life-saving assistance to so many people in such a short space of time. So funding, ongoing funding, is a major problem and a major need. We recently, all the agencies launched an appeal for almost $1 billion to help refugees in the next few months throughout the end of the year, and the affected host communities. It's really crucial that Bangladesh, which has been shouldering the lion's share of the responsibility, is supported by international governments and donors. So that would be number one. And number two would be to have a political resolution to this crisis. It's a crisis that began in Myanmar, and Myanmar needs to take action to show that it is willing to take action so that people can go back. They fled because they had no civil rights. They were stateless. They were facing extreme violence and persecution. And many refugees say they want to go home, but they will only go home if they can have their legal status resolved. They can go back as full citizens and play an active part in society without fear of violence and persecution. That is crucial.
Caroline, I want to thank you for your time. You stay healthy. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Caroline Gluck is a senior information officer with the United Nations Refugee Agency, and we reached her in Cox's Bazar refugee camp in Bangladesh.
The Prime Minister's special envoy to Myanmar has released his final report. Bob Rae has made 17 recommendations after examining the humanitarian and security situation. About 700,000 Rohingya Muslims fled to neighbouring Bangladesh after facing severe discrimination and, in some cases, deadly violence. Among his recommendations, Rae says the world community must work to stabilize the humanitarian situation in the refugee camps and in Myanmar. Stop the power struggle between civilian and military authorities within Myanmar's leadership. Establish accountability for what happened, even if opponents throw up roadblocks. Rae says the Canadian government needs to accept the scale of the problem, and he warns there will be no easy fix. Finally, the special envoy also urged Canada to welcome more refugees to save lives among the vulnerable. It was Bob Rae who prepared and delivered the report this morning. He was appointed special envoy to Myanmar by the Prime Minister in October, and Bob Rae joins me now from Ottawa. So, Mr. Rae, we heard some of the recommendations there from your report. What is your priority right now?
I think I'd have to say the immediate priority is the humanitarian situation in Bangladesh and also in Myanmar. That there's a lot of lives at risk here, and we are going to have to take that risk much more seriously as we approach the season of bad weather. So that, I think, has got to be the number one priority in terms of our immediate response. Our priority is saving lives and protecting life, and that has to be the priority here.
You mentioned that we cannot just abandon the field. How exactly should Canada increase its presence?
Well, I think it's not just Canada, but I think there's a sense in a number of Western countries that, globally democracy is in retreat. It's clear that a lot of countries are not taking the shift to democracy seriously enough, and human rights in so many places are, under attack. We've got 65 million people in refugee camps around the world. So you could easily say, look, it's all getting too complicated, let's just pull back. And I'm urging us not to do that as a country, that we need to be working with other countries to show the presence not only of our people, but also of our values, because I think that there are a lot of people in countries around the world who share our concern about the rule of law, our concern about human rights, our concern about human freedom, and I think it's very important for us to continue to be present around the world in promoting that.
Now, the government has certainly been focused on another humanitarian crisis by bringing in thousands of Syrian refugees, many of whom are still settling into life in Canada. So how willing do you think, or able do you think, this government is and this country is to welcome more refugees?
Well, we've got time. I mean, this is not something that's going to be dealt with immediately. I think, that, as I said, the top priority is making sure people are safe where they are. But we've responded to virtually every refugee crisis in the world, going back to the Second World War, to Hungary, to Vietnam, over many, many years. So I think we can respond. I think the question of how many, what other countries will do, I think that's going to take a lot of time. All I'm saying is we should be open to the conversation. We should not go into this with closed minds.
You also mentioned that it's time for the world to gather evidence and to protect that evidence for use in possible trials in the future. How can this be done?
Well, there's people in camps right now. There's a lot of people who have experiences which they need to be encouraged to share. And in sharing them, we need to understand that this is going to involve doing a lot to protect evidence and to make sure that people are in fact willing to come forward and that their evidence is in fact reliable. As much physical evidence as possible, photographs, pictures, that kind of thing. We need to be collecting as much of that data as we can. Obviously, it's very difficult to get on the ground in Rakhine State. A lot of the villages have been bulldozed, so it's going to be difficult to gather evidence there. We need to understand the challenges, but that shouldn't stop us from making the effort. In fact, I think it's going to be an important contributor to reinforcing the message to those in power that there's nowhere to hide here. They've got to understand that the truth will out, and as it comes out, it's going to have an impact.
And speaking of that, you've said that we need to hold those responsible for all of this. And so
yes.
I know that you include the military, you include the generals, but do you also include Aung San Suu Kyi?
Well, I think you have to go where the evidence takes you. I mean, part of my report talks about the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi has become the face of the Myanmar government, but she's not really in charge of that government. She's part of this rather unique constitutional situation. I think you just go where the evidence leads, and I haven't seen so far, I haven't seen any evidence that would say she's personally responsible. But on the other hand, if that's where the evidence takes you, then that's where the evidence takes you.
Do you worry that while Canada may step up and help with the refugee situation, that the world seems to be a more closed place when it comes to accepting refugees and dealing with horrible humanitarian crises like the one that your report talks about?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think as an American observer who said the world is in disarray, and I think we do need to understand that we're not living in a world with adult supervision at the moment, or put it another way, we are the adults. We have to live up to our traditions and work with other like-minded countries in creating a different kind of space. And I think this is something we need to do, and that is a task for our foreign policy more broadly. And I've discussed that with Minister Freeland and with Mr. Trudeau last week. And I think that's something we need to see this as part of a broader movement in our foreign policy.
That's an interesting point that you say. Are you hopeful that the adults, the Canadians, are going to be listened to? It just doesn't feel that way.
We're not alone. The point is we gather strength from working with others. And I think the fact is we obviously can't rely on many governments that have previously been leaders in the world in these fields and others. But it is a shift in ground, and I think we need to understand that there are more responsibilities falling on our shoulders, and we have to be prepared to accept our share of what that is. We're not going to do it alone, but we have to be part of the effort.
Mr. Ray, good of you to take the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Ray, Canada's Special Envoy to Myanmar in our Ottawa studio.